My name is Elizabeth Turner, but most people just call me Liz. I am 40 years old, and for 15 years I believed I had the kind of marriage people wrote about in fairy tales. When I first met Michael, or Mike as everyone knew him, I was 24, fresh out of graduate school and so full of hope. He was charming in the way that made a room lighter, funny without trying too hard, and deeply ambitious. Those qualities pulled me in, and before long I couldn't imagine my life without him. Hello besties, kindly take a moment and subscribe to this YouTube channel, thank you. We married in a little chapel just outside of Boston. It was a modest wedding, but in my heart it felt grander than any ballroom celebration could have. We promised each other forever, and I held on to that promise with everything in me. 4 years my life revolved around him, his career, his dreams, his comfort. When he decided to take a risk and start his own consulting firm, I put my own career on hold, working long hours at a steady but less demanding job to keep us afloat financially. I told myself it was just for a while, that one day we would both shine side by side. The early years were not easy, but there was laughter. We rented a small apartment with creaky floors and an outdated kitchen, yet I was happy. I cooked us simple dinners, and we would sit on the balcony with cheap wine, watching the city lights and talking about the future. He would hold my hand across the small table, look into my eyes, and tell me I was his world. I believed him. When his business finally took off, I was the first to celebrate. I still remember the night he came home, eyes alight, waving the first big contract. We popped open a bottle of champagne we couldn't really afford, but it didn't matter. We danced in the living room like children. Soon the business grew, money started flowing, and with it came a new lifestyle. A bigger house in the suburbs, vacations abroad, dinners at fine restaurants. Things I once only dreamed of became part of our reality. Yet with that growth came sacrifices I quietly bore. I delayed having children when he said the timing wasn't right, telling myself there would always be time later. I moved further away from my own parents to support his business ties. I attended countless corporate events, smiling by his side, being the picture-perfect wife even when I was exhausted. And when Becky, my younger sister, moved into our guest room for a while after college, I opened my home to her without hesitation. Family was family, and I wanted her to feel safe. Life looked perfect from the outside. Friends envied us. Susan, my closest friend, once said, "Liz, you're living the dream," and I smiled, though sometimes I felt like I was the one holding the dream together with trembling hands. But I never complained. I reminded myself that marriage was about commitment, about weathering storms and supporting each other. Over the years, my own dreams shifted. I once wanted to write, maybe teach literature at a university, but somehow those ambitions dimmed in the shadow of his. My fulfillment came from seeing him succeed, from making sure our home was warm, our lives organized, our image intact. He worked late many nights, sometimes gone for business trips longer than I liked, but I trusted him completely. Why wouldn't I? He was my husband, my partner, my everything. Even in quiet moments, I told myself I was blessed. Sunday mornings were my favorite. He would make pancakes, his only specialty, and we would sit in the kitchen, sunlight spilling through the windows, with Becky joining us sometimes, laughter echoing off the walls. Felt like family, like home, and I cherished it. As the years went by, though, I started noticing subtle changes. He became more distant, less attentive, distracted in ways I couldn't explain. He still provided, still played the role of the successful husband, but the warmth between us began to thin. I thought it was just stress, maybe the natural ebb of long marriages. I tried to rekindle our spark. Surprise dinners, weekend trips, small notes tucked into his briefcase. He appreciated them, or at least pretended to, but something was slipping away. I ignored my intuition because acknowledging it felt like betraying my own hope. I reminded myself of all the sacrifices I had made, the years I had poured into us, the love I still carried. Surely this was just a season, a rough patch, one we would get through. After all, 15 years meant something, didn't it? Looking back now, I see the signs I missed. The extra smiles when Becky walked into the room. The way his conversations with her lingered. The casual touches that lasted a second too long. At the time, I brushed them off. He was just being a supportive brother-in-law, I told myself. And Becky, my own sister, would never betray me. I clung to that belief because it was easier than facing the possibility that my perfect marriage was anything but. For 15 years, I built my world around Mike, never realizing how fragile that foundation truly was. I was still smiling, still carrying the weight of our life with quiet strength, when the truth finally came crashing down, and with it the illusion I had so carefully protected. The night it all unraveled is still etched into my bones. It was an ordinary Thursday evening, cool air drifting through the open window, the faint hum of traffic beyond the trees. Mike came home later than usual, his tie loosened, his face carrying a weight I couldn't quite name. I had cooked his favorite, roast chicken with rosemary, and the house smelled comforting the way I always wanted it to when he walked through the door. But instead of his usual tired smile, there was only silence. We sat across from each other at the dining table, the candles flickering between us. He pushed the food around his plate, barely taking a bite. My chest tightened. Something was wrong, and I could feel it even before he looked up at me with eyes I no longer recognized. "Liz," he said, his voice trembling in a way that made my skin prickle. "I need to tell you something." My fork clattered against the plate. "What is it?" I asked, forcing calm into my tone even though my heart pounded against my ribs. He hesitated, ran a hand through his hair, and finally exhaled. I've fallen in love with someone else." The words fell heavy, suffocating, splitting the air between us. My throat closed. My first instinct was denial. I must have misheard. 15 years, all the sacrifices, the laughter, the vows, he couldn't mean it. I whispered, "Who?" He swallowed hard. His gaze flickered, then steadied on me. "Becky." For a moment I couldn't breathe. My sister's name was a blade, slicing through me clean and merciless. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles white as the world tilted. "Rebecca." My voice cracked, broken and unfamiliar. "My sister." He nodded, his face twisted in guilt, though his confession sounded rehearsed, as though he had practiced in his head countless times. "It just happened. I didn't mean for it to, but I can't deny it anymore." I pushed back my chair, the legs scraping against the hardwood like a scream. I paced the room, clutching my arms against myself. "You're telling me that after everything, after 15 years, you've been, what? Sneaking around with her?" "Liz, it wasn't like that at first," he said quickly. "We connected. We talked. One thing led to another." "Stop." My voice was sharp, sharper than I'd ever heard it. "Don't you dare dress this up as some star-crossed love story. You betrayed me. Both of you did." Tears stung my eyes, but I refused to let them fall in front of him. I thought about Becky, the sister I'd protected when she was younger, the one I had invited into my home, the one I trusted completely. The betrayal from her cut deeper than the one from him. Blood is supposed to be unshakable, isn't it? I staggered into the living room and he followed, pleading. "I didn't want to hurt you, Liz. But I can't keep living a lie. I want a divorce." The final word shattered whatever was left of my strength. Divorce. He had made his choice, and it wasn't me. I sank onto the couch, numb, staring at the man I had once considered my soulmate. "How long?" I whispered. His silence was my answer. "Too long. Long enough for secrets to grow roots while I watered them with my trust." When I finally stood, my body trembled, but my voice carried steel. "Get out." He left that night, taking only an overnight bag. I sat alone in the dimly lit house, the walls echoing with memories that now felt poisoned. My phone buzzed hours later, a message from Becky. I couldn't bring myself to open it. I threw the phone aside and curled into myself, shivering though the house was warm. The days that followed blurred together. Susan came over when I finally answered her call, her arms wrapping around me the moment she saw my face. I broke then, sobs tearing through me, my body shaking as though the grief itself was trying to escape. Liz, you don't deserve this, Susan whispered, holding me like a lifeline. You gave him everything. You gave them both everything. Her words were true, but they didn't soften the sting. I replayed every moment, every sign I had ignored. The way Becky had laughed at his jokes a little too loudly. The way he lit up when she entered the room. I had thought it was innocent, even sweet. Foolish me. Nights became the hardest. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, haunted by visions of them together. My marriage bed felt foreign, contaminated. I moved to the guest room, then eventually to the couch, unable to find rest anywhere. I hadn't just lost my husband, I had lost my sister, my trust, my foundation. Weeks later, he came back to finalize things. He spoke of lawyers and paperwork, his voice detached, as though we were business partners dissolving a contract rather than a family breaking apart. I listened in silence, my heart aching but my face cold. Somewhere deep inside, a seed of resolve was beginning to take root. I may have been broken, but I was not finished. The betrayal had gutted me, yes. But in the ruins of everything I thought I knew, a different kind of strength stirred, quiet, sharp, waiting. I didn't yet know how I would survive, but I knew one thing for certain: I would not let them destroy me completely. The day I walked into the lawyer's office, a cold drizzle painted the city in shades of gray. I remember clutching my umbrella like it was the only anchor holding me steady. My heart was still cracked open, raw from betrayal, but I knew I had to face this storm head-on. Mike wanted a divorce, and for the first time in my life, I was determined not to simply give away the pieces of myself I had fought for all those years. The lawyer, Mr. Gallagher, was a composed man in his 50s, with a calm voice that steadied me when I felt myself unraveling. He listened patiently as I explained everything: 15 years of marriage, my sacrifices, the affair with my sister, the abrupt confession. His eyes softened as he took notes, though his words were pragmatic. Liz, you've invested your life in this marriage. You've supported his career, made sacrifices that allowed him to grow his wealth. You're entitled to what is fair and more. The word entitled felt foreign on my tongue. I had never thought of myself in that way. For years I had been the giver, the supporter, the quiet strength behind his success. Now, for once, I had to see myself as someone deserving of justice. Mike's reaction to the legal proceedings was telling. The charm he once wielded with ease faded when he realized I wasn't going to simply sign away everything. He wanted freedom, yes, but he also wanted control, the narrative that painted him as a man following his heart rather than one destroying a family. He underestimated me. Our meetings were tense. He sat across the conference table, shoulders stiff, avoiding my eyes. His lawyer spoke of amicable settlements, of reasonable division, but I heard only the echo of his betrayal, the hollow ring of his promises. I spoke clearly, my voice steady though my hands trembled beneath the table. I gave him 15 years. I worked to support us while he built his business. I delayed children because he asked. I opened my home to my sister, who is now his mistress. I will not walk away empty-handed. The room went silent. For the first time I saw him flinch, not with guilt, but with the realization that I was no longer the woman he could bend with soft words and half-truths. The divorce process stretched for months, each hearing another wound, each document another reminder of what I had lost. Friends called to check in, some expressing disbelief, others offering sympathy. I withdrew from most of them. I couldn't stand the pity in their voices, the subtle gossip I knew swirled behind polite words. Through it all, Susan remained my rock. She drove me to court on days when my legs felt like they couldn't carry me. She sat with me afterward, sharing coffee in silence, her presence enough to keep me from drowning. When the settlement was finalized, I walked away with more than I had expected. Half of his business assets, the house, financial security for the first time that was mine alone. But more than the money, it was the principle. It was proof that my sacrifices had value, that my years weren't just erased by his betrayal. The day the judge signed the decree, I went home and stood in front of the mirror. My reflection startled me. I looked older, yes, lines of pain carved into my face, but behind the weariness I saw something I hadn't seen in years: resolve. I started packing soon after. The house we had shared, once filled with warmth and laughter, now suffocated me with ghosts. Every corner whispered of what had been and what had been lost. I couldn't breathe there anymore. I needed distance, not just from him but from her, from all of it. Mike tried one last time to speak to me, showing up unannounced as I carried boxes to the moving truck. His eyes held a flicker of the man I had once loved, but I no longer trusted what I saw. "Liz," he began, "I never wanted to hurt you. I hope someday you can forgive me." I studied him for a long moment, the weight of years between us pressing down. "Forgiveness isn't a gift I can hand out on your terms," I replied quietly. "Maybe one day I'll find it, but not for you, for me." I closed the door behind him, the sound final and liberating. The drive to the new city was both terrifying and exhilarating. I left behind everything familiar: friends, memories, even the streets that had witnessed my joys and sorrows. But with each mile, the ache in my chest eased, replaced by a fragile sense of freedom. When I arrived at the small apartment I had rented, the space felt bare, almost lonely. Yet as I set down the first box and looked around, I realized it was mine. No one else's shadow hung over these walls. It was the beginning of something new, though I didn't yet know what that would look like. That first night, I lay on a mattress on the floor, the room quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. I stared at the ceiling, letting the silence wrap around me. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for him to come home, wasn't wondering what mood he'd be in, wasn't calculating how to keep the peace. I was simply me, hurt, yes, but free. The divorce had broken me in ways I never imagined, but it had also forged a different kind of strength. I was no longer the woman who gave everything without question. I was a woman who had walked through fire and survived. And though I didn't know it yet, survival was only the beginning. The first few weeks in the new city felt like walking into an entirely different chapter of my life, one I hadn't prepared for but desperately needed. My apartment was modest, a 2-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a brick building with ivy creeping up its walls. The neighborhood was quieter than the bustling suburb I had left behind. The streets were lined with coffee shops, small bookstores, and a park just a few blocks away. It wasn't grand, but it was mine, and for the first time in a long time I felt the faint stirrings of belonging. I spent my mornings unpacking and my afternoons wandering the city, letting my feet lead me through unfamiliar streets. I bought groceries from a local market where the cashier remembered my name after just 2 visits. I stumbled into a little cafe that became my refuge, its wooden tables scarred with years of use, the aroma of espresso lingering in the air. The barista, a young woman with pink hair and a warm smile, greeted me like an old friend after only a few days. The small rituals of building a new life began to stitch me back together. I bought fresh flowers for my kitchen table each week, a habit I had never indulged in before. I signed up for a yoga class even though I was clumsy and inflexible, simply because it gave me something to look forward to. Slowly, the silence of my apartment began to feel less like loneliness and more like peace. Yet there were nights when grief ambushed me. I would wake from dreams where everything was as it had been, Mike beside me, Becky laughing in the kitchen, only to open my eyes and remember the truth. On those nights, I sat by the window with a blanket wrapped around me, staring out at the city lights, reminding myself that healing wasn't linear. Pain still lived inside me, but so did hope. One afternoon, while browsing the shelves of a local bookstore, I struck up a conversation with the owner, a man named Daniel Hayes. He was in his mid-40s, with kind eyes and a quiet confidence that put me at ease. He asked what I liked to read, and before I knew it, we were discussing novels I hadn't thought about in years. I left the store that day with 2 books and a smile I hadn't felt in months. Daniel began to appear in small ways. He would wave when I walked past the shop, recommend a new title when I stopped in, sometimes join me for coffee across the street. Our conversations flowed easily, not forced or heavy, but light like fresh air after a long storm. He never pried into my past, and I didn't volunteer much at first. It was enough just to feel seen again. Susan called often, her voice a thread tying me back to the life I had left. "You sound lighter," she said once. "It's good for you there, isn't it?" I told her about the yoga classes, the cafe, even about Daniel, though I kept my words careful, not ready to label what I didn't yet understand. Work also became part of my healing. I had taken a position at a community college teaching literature, something I had once dreamed of but set aside for Mike's ambitions. Standing in front of students, discussing poetry and prose, lit a spark in me I thought I had lost. Their questions, their curiosity reminded me that I still had something valuable to give. The more I built in this new city, the less space Mike and Becky occupied in my thoughts. They were still there, shadows in the corners of my mind, but they no longer defined me. I stopped checking social media, stopped wondering if their relationship had survived the chaos. Whatever they were, it wasn't my concern anymore. My story had moved on. One Saturday, Daniel invited me to join him at a community fair. First, I hesitated, part of me still cautious, still healing. But when I saw the warmth in his smile, I said yes. The fair was simple: food stalls, live music, children running around with painted faces. We walked together, laughing as he tried and failed to win me a stuffed bear at one of the booths. For a moment, I felt like the younger version of myself, the one who believed in joy without fear. As the sun set, he turned to me, his expression gentle. "You seem like someone who's been through a lot," he said softly. "But you carry yourself with such strength." I looked at him, startled by the sincerity in his words. No one had ever seen me like that before. I swallowed the lump in my throat and managed a small smile. "Strength doesn't come without scars." He nodded, as though he understood more than he said. That night, when I returned to my apartment, I sat at the kitchen table with fresh flowers in a vase and realized something. I was no longer just surviving. I was living again. The rebuilding wasn't just about finding a new home or job. It was about rediscovering who I was without him, without them. And slowly, gently, I was learning to love that version of myself. I didn't know where things with Daniel would lead, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of the unknown. I was ready to see what came next. Love came back into my life quietly, almost like a whisper, and not in the grand, sweeping way I once believed it had to. With Daniel, there were no dizzying fireworks or dizzy promises. Instead, there was steady warmth, the kind that settled into my bones, reminding me what it felt like to be safe. We began seeing each other more often, usually in simple ways. A walk through the park with coffee in hand, an evening at the bookstore after his closing hours, dinners at local diners where the waitresses knew his name. He didn't try to impress me, and I didn't try to impress him. We were simply two people learning how to share space, slowly, tenderly. First, I kept my guard up. Through 15 years of devotion that ended in betrayal, trust felt like a fragile thread I was afraid to touch. But Daniel never pushed. He was patient, always giving me room to breathe. When I grew quiet, he didn't press for answers. He simply sat with me, his presence enough to ease the ache of silence. One evening, as autumn leaves painted the sidewalks gold, we sat on a park bench watching children chase each other across the grass. The air was crisp, and the world seemed gentler in that moment. I turned to him and said, almost without thinking, "I never thought I'd start over at 40. He smiled, his eyes kind. "Starting over doesn't mean you've lost. It means you've survived. And you've chosen yourself." Those words lingered with me, echoing long after the evening ended. Choosing myself, that was what I had done when I walked away from Mike, when I left the house, when I began this new life. For so long, I had defined myself by someone else's needs, someone else's dreams. But here now, I was learning that I was enough all on my own. Still, there came a night when the past surged back with sharp teeth. Mike called. I don't know what I expected when I answered, maybe guilt, maybe gloating. Instead, his voice was hollow. He told me things hadn't worked out with Becky, that he regretted how he had handled everything. "I was a fool, Liz," he said. "I lost the best thing that ever happened to me." I sat in silence, staring at the glow of the city through my window. Once his words would have broken me. Once I would have begged for answers, for closure, for love again. But now I felt only distance, a quiet separation that told me I had finally healed. "I hope you find peace, Mike," I said softly. "But I'm not your best thing anymore. I'm my own." And with that, I hung up. The next day, Daniel and I went on a hike just outside the city. The trail wound through tall pines, the sunlight breaking through in soft beams. The peak overlooking the valley, he reached for my hand. His touch was gentle, no demand behind it, only quiet offering. For the first time, I didn't pull away. Something inside me loosened, a knot I had carried for far too long. I looked at him and felt no fear, just gratitude. Gratitude that life, even after devastation, could still bloom again. Gratitude that I had found someone who didn't just love me, but respected the journey that had brought me here. Months passed, and what began as companionship deepened into love. Not the reckless, all-consuming love I once thought was necessary, but a love that steadied me, lifted me, made me laugh in ways I hadn't in years. It wasn't perfect, we both carried scars, both had our histories, but it was real. When he first told me he loved me, we were sitting on the bookstore floor, surrounded by stacks of novels. He said it simply, without drama. "Liz, I love you." And for once, I didn't hesitate. I didn't question. I let the words settle into my heart, warm and true, and whispered back, "I love you too." Looking back now, I see my life in chapters. Chapter of sacrifice, of believing love meant giving everything of myself. The chapter of betrayal, when my world shattered in the most unimaginable way. The chapter of rebuilding, when I chose to step away and start anew. And now this chapter, redemption. Redemption not because I found love again, though that is part of it. Redemption because I found myself. 'Cause I learned that no betrayal, no heartbreak, no abandonment could erase my worth. If I could speak to the woman I was, the one curled up on the couch the night Mike left, I would tell her this: you will survive. You will rebuild. And one day you will love again, not because you need to, but because you want to, because your heart is stronger than you know. Love didn't return to me in the form I once expected, but it came. And when it did, I realized that sometimes the most beautiful endings are the ones we never see coming. Betrayal may break us, but choosing ourselves restores us. Healing leads to strength, and strength opens the door to love again. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to this YouTube channel for more stories like, and please share out this video to your loved ones.